Get to your hallway, closet, as many walls between you and the outside as you can. Baseball helmet, football helmet, get those on. Make sure that you guys pull out some pillows, blankets, mattress, get those over your head, put some padding between you and the walls. The time is up. You cannot be out on the road at this point in Mayfield. It's too late.
Tornado emergency for Mayfield. The National Weather Service in Paducah has issued a tornado warning for central Graves County in western Kentucky until 10:15 p.m. Central Standard Time. At 9:25 p.m. Central Standard Time, a confirmed large and destructive tornado was observed over Mayfield, moving northeast at 60 miles per hour. Tornado emergency for Mayfield.
On the night of December 10th, 2021, a tornado outbreak of unimaginable intensity tore through 6 U.S. states. 89 lives were lost and more than 1,000 homes were destroyed or left in ruins. December tornado outbreaks of this scale are rare. In western Kentucky, the atmospheric conditions that night more closely resembled those typically seen in spring. Warm, moisture-rich air surged north from the Gulf of Mexico, while a powerful jet stream intensified winds high above the surface. This combination allowed storms to remain organized for hours rather than minutes, increasing both their longevity and destructive potential. For the survivors of the quad-state supercell outbreak, the struggle had only just begun. Bitter cold, scarce resources, and the overwhelming scope of the destruction made the first hours critical. Yet in the face of chaos, communities refused to be broken. Neighbors helped neighbors. Acts of courage by first responders and volunteers saved countless lives, offering hope in a time of despair. Today, we revisit one of the most heavily affected areas 4 years later. A lot of questions still remain. This is a story of resilience, of extraordinary people standing firm against extraordinary forces. This is the story of Mayfield, Kentucky. Before we look at Mayfield today, we must first understand its history. Settlement in the area began around 1820, and the city was officially established in 1823 as the seat of Graves County. Mayfield took its name from Mayfield Creek, which flowed through the area where early settlers, including John Anderson, first camped and built homes around 1820. Over generations, Mayfield developed as a regional center of agriculture, trade, and manufacturing, a role that shaped both its economy and its identity. The Mayfield Downtown Commercial District, listed on the National Register of Historic Places, tells the story of a town shaped by commerce and tradition. Its historic buildings, a mix of architectural styles, reflect a long and rich commercial history. Broadway Street and the surrounding blocks form the core of local businesses where small shops and family-owned enterprises serve generations of residents. Mayfield High School, founded in the early 1900s, became more than a place of learning. It was a center of local pride, community events, and tradition. Home of the Mayfield Cardinals, the school's football team brought the community together each fall, with Friday night games filling the stands and streets with cheering families and neighbors. Mayfield carried a quiet, familiar charm. The rhythm of life allowed neighbors to know one another by name. Its old brick buildings, historic landmarks, and shops gave the town a tangible connection to its past. One of the larger employers in town was Mayfield Consumer Products, a family-owned candle manufacturer founded in 1998 by Mary Probst. What began as a small garage operation grew into one of the region's major employers, producing scented candles and home fragrance products for national retailers. The factory employed hundreds of local workers and played a significant role in the city's economy, especially during the busy holiday season. For many residents and businesses affected by the storm, December 10, 2021 resulted in irreversible change, with long-term consequences extending well beyond the immediate destruction. The tornado swept through with violent force, leaving 24 people dead in Graves County alone. Homes, businesses, and historic landmarks were destroyed. Much of the city's physical history was swept away in minutes. In total, the tornado remained on the ground for about 166 miles, making it one of the longest track tornadoes in U.S. history. Along its path, it grew to over 1 mile wide at times. Radar analysis and post-storm damage surveys confirmed that the tornado maintained a continuous, well-defined circulation over an extended distance. The vortex did not dissipate or cycle as the storm progressed, instead remaining on the ground as a single long-track tornado, a characteristic associated with higher damage potential. At approximately 9:25 p.m., the tornado entered Mayfield from the southwest, cutting through an industrial corridor with devastating force. Several metal buildings were destroyed, including the candle factory, where workers were actively preparing products for the Christmas season. Inside that facility alone, 9 people lost their lives. The tornado then continued northeast, striking a series of steel grain bins and tearing the roofs from several of them, spilling their contents across the surrounding area. It moved next into the Mayfield Garden apartments, where multiple buildings sustained roof damage. One building lost its entire roof along with parts of its upper floor. Pressing farther northeast into residential neighborhoods, the tornado maintained extreme intensity. A large steel water tower was toppled, underscoring the violent force of the storm as it moved deeper into the city. As the tornado entered downtown Mayfield, it tore through blocks of historic brick buildings. The tornado then struck the county courthouse, toppling its domed clock tower and collapsing the building's upper level. Just across the street, a one-story fire station suffered severe damage, losing both its roof and communications tower. From there, the tornado continued through an older residential neighborhood before reaching the Mayfield Manor apartments on the city's northeast side, where one apartment building was completely destroyed. As the storm worked its way through Mayfield, the violent circulation caused houses to shake for miles. Some survivors later described a sound like a saw, a deafening roar as the winds threatened to tear their homes apart. The tornado then moved east of the apartment complex and struck the Mayfield Health and Rehabilitation Center, tearing away part of the roof and collapsing sections of its exterior walls. Just across the street to the south, the storm moved through the Windhaven apartments, where one building lost its roof entirely and others sustained varying degrees of damage. Shortly after, the tornado exited Mayfield on the northeast side, continuing its path of devastation. For many who survived the tornado, the night did not end when the winds passed. Numerous individuals sustained life-altering injuries, some suffering severe burns, others trapped beneath collapsed debris for hours as they waited for rescue. Survival for them marked the beginning of a far longer journey. Soon after the tornado passed, images and videos began circulating on social media and news outlets. They revealed the destruction in stark detail, capturing the extraordinary power of a storm that struck in the dead of night. In the immediate aftermath, Mayfield was plunged into near total isolation. Cell towers were damaged, power was out, and communications systems failed across much of the city. Phone calls would not connect, and text messages went unanswered. For countless families, there was no way to know whether loved ones were alive, injured, or buried beneath the rubble. Time slowed to a crawl, and the uncertainty became unbearable. As time passed with no information, many residents made the decision to search on their own. Despite debris-filled streets and freezing temperatures, people left what shelter they had and set out on foot, calling names into the darkness and navigating collapsed buildings by flashlight. In many cases, this was the only option available. Inside the Mayfield Consumer Products facility, employees had recognized the danger as the storm approached. Several managed to send text messages or make brief phone calls to family members, warning them of what was coming. For those waiting at home, those final messages became a lifeline. When the communication stopped abruptly, seconds felt like hours, and hope faded with each passing moment. The scale of the destruction quickly overwhelmed emergency responders. Roads were blocked, equipment was limited, and access to some areas was impossible. In the absence of immediate outside assistance, many able-bodied residents stepped forward to help. Neighbors searched through debris, assisted the injured, and worked alongside first responders as best they could. In those early hours, survival depended as much on community action as on formal rescue efforts. The cold compounded the crisis. With power knocked out and homes destroyed, many survivors were exposed to below-freezing temperatures. People relied on basic survival techniques, starting fire for warmth, huddling together, and sharing whatever resources they could find. For LaGrange, Kentucky resident Heather McGuffin, the hours that followed were marked by unbearable uncertainty. She held tightly to her phone, returning again and again to the final message her sister sent from inside the Mayfield candle factory. It was not a message of fear for herself, but a warning, a last selfless act to protect her younger sister. Jill had moved to Mayfield just 6 weeks earlier in October, seeking a fresh start in what she believed would be a quiet community. 6 weeks later, the tornado tore through the town. She was scheduled to return home the following weekend to spend Christmas with her family. In the time since, Heather has made the deliberate choice to speak publicly about her sister. Sharing Jill's photographs and telling her story has become part of how she carries her grief forward. For Heather, remembrance is more than mourning a loss. It is about preserving identity. It's about ensuring Jill is known for the person she was, the loving sister who shared a welcoming smile, brightening the lives of those around her. Her story reflects the experience of many in Mayfield and other communities devastated by the tornadoes. Communities bound together by tragedy, sustained by compassion, and determined to remember those who were taken far too soon. As dawn broke, the full scale of the destruction became visible. Entire blocks had been reduced to debris. Homes were flattened, landmarks that once defined the town were gone. What had been hidden by darkness was now impossible to overlook. In daylight, the tornado's damaged path became unmistakable, a continuous scar cutting directly through Mayfield. In some areas, entire neighborhoods were erased, while nearby structures stood partially intact. This uneven pattern, later documented by the National Weather Service survey teams, reflected the violent fluctuations within the tornado itself. News helicopters and aerial drones began flying overhead, documenting the damage from above. For survivors on the ground, the sound of aircraft served as a stark reminder that Mayfield was no longer isolated. The disaster had drawn national and international attention, and images of the town's destruction were beginning to circulate around the world. Emergency officials relied heavily on these aerial assessments to identify the hardest hit areas and direct rescue operations. From above, the storm's track could be followed block by block, through residential neighborhoods, commercial districts, and industrial corridors. As daylight allowed search efforts to expand, rescue teams and volunteers continued working through debris piles, often by hand. In many areas, heavy equipment could not be used immediately due to unstable wreckage and the possibility of survivors still trapped beneath it. The search was methodical and cautious, balancing urgency with safety. In tornado disasters, the most critical rescues often occur before outside assistance can arrive. Blocked roads, damaged infrastructures, and overwhelmed dispatch systems can delay formal response, leaving survival dependent on immediate community action. For residents, the morning brought clarity but not relief. Many were seeing their neighborhoods for the first time since the storm hit, confronting losses that would take years to fully understand. What remained was a town forever changed, beginning the long process of recovery amid the reality of what had been lost. For first responders, the disaster carried a different kind of weight. As police officers, firefighters, paramedics, and rescue teams moved through the wreckage, they encountered scenes that extended far beyond what training manuals could prepare them for. Many worked long hours with little rest, navigating unstable debris, damaged infrastructure, and the constant uncertainty of what or who they might encounter next. These were not abstract figures or statistics. The victims they recovered were neighbors, co-workers, classmates, and members of the same community they served. Names were learned, faces were seen, personal belongings were gathered and documented. Each discovery carried emotional consequences that did not end when the shift was over. In disasters of this scale, responders are tasked with maintaining focus and professionalism while processing loss in real time. The responsibility to continue searching, documenting, and assisting others often leaves little space to immediately acknowledge the psychological toll of the work itself. Long after the debris is cleared and the headlines fade, many first responders carry those memories with them. A lasting imprint of the night Mayfield was changed forever. The lasting consequences of injuries sustained that night would force many survivors to adapt to an entirely new reality, one defined by long-term recovery, resilience, and the challenge of rebuilding lives permanently changed. There are moments that resist explanation, moments when words fall short, and few experiences are as difficult to describe as realizing in a single instant that everything once familiar has been altered forever. This was not a tragedy limited to Mayfield. Across the region, multiple tornadoes proved deadly. One violent EF4 tornado tore through northeast Arkansas, crossed the Missouri Boot Heel, and reached northwest Tennessee. leaving a long trail of destruction and claiming lives along the way. National Weather Service surveys later confirmed that this tornado, like the one that struck Mayfield, maintained violent intensity for an unusually long duration. In Missouri and Illinois, 2 strong EF3 tornadoes also proved fatal, one near Defiance, Missouri, and another in Edwardsville, Illinois, where an Amazon distribution facility was struck and 6 people were killed. Industrial facilities in particular face unique risks during violent tornadoes. Large open floor plans, limited hardened shelter space, and active shifts can leave workers especially vulnerable when extreme weather strikes, a reality emergency management officials across the region have since re-examined. Sadly, Kentucky would suffer the greatest toll in the outbreak. The long-track tornado that devastated Mayfield was part of a larger, persistent storm system, a system that reorganized and cycled as it moved across the region. Each cycle allowed the storm to produce new areas of extreme damage, extending both its reach and its lethality. The Western Kentucky tornado alone claimed 57 lives, including heavy losses in places like Mayfield, the Princeton area, Dawson Springs, and Bremen. Later that same night, Bowling Green was struck by a separate tornado that killed 17 more people, underscoring how widespread and simultaneous the outbreak truly was. Many small towns and rural communities never received sustained national attention. In places like Bremen, the impact was disproportionate, a small population facing immense loss. Even years later, recovery in parts of Western Kentucky remains ongoing, with some families still searching for stable housing and a sense of normalcy. Among all the lives lost, one stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of these disasters. In Dawson Springs, the tornado would claim the life of its youngest victim. Her name is Oakland Kuhn. She was 2 months old. She was her parents' first and only daughter, a new life just beginning to take shape in a family already full of love. Oakland had 2 brothers, Bentley and Dallas, and parents who had already begun to picture the years ahead. Milestones, memories, and a future growing alongside her. Jackie remembers her daughter as calm and gentle, content just to be held. Oakland was beginning to find her voice, small coos, early smiles, the quiet signs of a child discovering the world around her. On the night of the tornado, the family left their mobile home together, believing they were doing what would keep everyone safe. They drove to Jackie's mother's house in Dawson Springs, a place that felt familiar, solid, and close. The storm came fast. With the warnings closing in and nowhere else to go, the family gathered in the bathroom, pressed close, holding hands, prayer their only comfort as the storm bore down around them. When the tornado struck, the house could not withstand it. A nearby mobile home was thrown into the structure, tearing through walls and exposing the family to the force of the storm itself. In an instant, that sense of togetherness was gone, replaced by cold December air and confusion. The space that had held them moments earlier was torn open. The family was scattered among debris, injured and exposed to the night, waiting for help that could not reach them right away. In those hours, Jackie watched her husband become their anchor, moving through pain and uncertainty, driven only by the need to find his children, protect them, and bring his family back together. Even though he was injured himself, Douglas searched through darkness and freezing temperatures until he found them. He found Oakland crying, soaked from the storm. He would ultimately locate every member of his family. At first, Oakland's injuries did not appear life-threatening. Oakland survived the tornado and was reunited with her mother and siblings. But after multiple trips to the hospital, she was transferred to Louisville Children's Hospital, wrapped in care, surrounded by hope. In the hours that followed, her parents' growing sense that something wasn't right was confirmed. Oakland's condition began to deteriorate. Her family stayed close, holding on to hope, watching over her, and loving her through every moment they were given. Days after the tornado, Oakland passed away. She was never alone. In the aftermath, the family was met with kindness they never expected. Cards, messages, and gestures from people who wanted them to know Oakland mattered. Some shared they named their daughter Oakland, carrying her name forward as an act of remembrance, a way of saying she would not be forgotten. In Dawson Springs, the town began to rebuild, one home at a time. Oakland's grandmother's house was the first house to rise again, a quiet testament to a community's resolve to recover after tragedy. Oakland is deeply missed. She is remembered for the love she brought into the world and the love her family will always carry with them. In the days that followed, life in Western Kentucky did not return to normal. Instead, it slowed. People moved carefully, not only through debris-filled streets, but through the reality of what had happened. The darkness had passed, but clarity brought its own weight. Losses would now be seen clearly. But the deepest damage was not always visible. For many families, the days after the storm were lived moment by moment. Parking lots, shelters, and makeshift gathering places became spaces of waiting. People watched lists being written. They listened for names. They scanned faces, hoping for recognition. When that relief came, it was overwhelming. And when it didn't, the silence was just as powerful. Survival brought gratitude, but it also brought questions. Why did this house stand while another vanished? Why did one person make it out while another didn't? Why here? In Mayfield and the surrounding communities, those questions lingered quietly. They were not always spoken, but they were felt. The landscape itself had changed. Empty lots marked where families once lived. Twisted metal stood where people once worked. Personal belongings, photographs, clothing, toys, all scattered from where they belonged. These were not just signs of damage, they were reminders of lives interrupted. Hospitals remained overwhelmed. Families arrived from out of town to help or to grieve. Some came to help search, others came to say goodbye. And throughout it all, the cold remained. Cold that made each task harder. Cold that turned simple actions into risks. Cold that forced people to depend on one another for survival. In those first days, recovery did not begin with plans of funding. It began with people. Neighbors clearing debris, strangers sharing blankets, volunteers bringing food, fuel, and generators, first responders working long hours under conditions few are ever prepared for. The December 10th outbreak forced communities across the region to confront how fragile everyday life can be. A factory shift, a family home, a familiar street, all vulnerable in ways few had ever imagined, especially in the middle of winter. And when the immediate danger passed, a longer phase began. The slow, exhausting work of putting life back together. Even those who lost nothing physically were changed, because disasters leave behind more than damage. They leave memory. Places people avoided, places people returned to quietly, places forever tied to that night. Disasters cause two kinds of harm, the kind that can be seen and the kind that must be carried. And carrying it becomes part of survival. It is important to remember this. What happened across Western Kentucky and the surrounding states was not just a weather event. It was personal. It was families changed forever, children growing up without parents, parents living with unimaginable loss, siblings holding on to final messages and memories. And yet, in the midst of that loss, something else emerged. People showed up. Community became more than a word. It became a necessity. Across Mayfield and the countless other areas devastated on this night, families worked to ensure their loved ones were remembered for who they were, not only for the tragedy that took them. Because before recovery can begin, loss must be acknowledged. And before a community can move forward, it must first honor what and who was left behind.